So the types of batteries used is a lithium-ion battery. So it's nothing special. It's what you would find in a lot of laptops and mobile phones, and it's lasted over 10 years, being charged and discharged probably every day.
Yeah.
And they're only charging it for 4 hours a day with a 100 watt max probably solar panel. So,
and I mean, I've pointed out with the Apollo missions, the Apollo rover that they used, the battery technology on that was operating way out of the specified temperature on the high end, on the moon, and that's in their own documents. So yeah, you've got some serious questions here, certainly.
And if we just go back to the comparison that I've made in the document, imagine putting a mobility scooter on the moon, right, with a couple of solar panels on it. How long is it going to last without plugging it into the mains? I don't buy it.
Right.
All right, let's have a look at the Curiosity rover. Now, this is a different beast altogether. It's much bigger, more sort of the size of a car, much more highly powered. And this is the one that there was big fanfare a few years back when it allegedly landed on Mars, and we're going to look at that in a minute. But uses a different power system, Andrew. This is using some sort of nuclear isotope power system.
The system, as I understand it, is basically uses some type of thermocouple, doesn't it? Where you have the cool temperatures on the outside of the vehicle, and then you have a warmer temperature which is created by the radioactive decay from the isotope, and then you have a thermocouple set up between those 2 points, and that provides a current from the temperature difference. That's my understanding.
So
that works.
Right. I've said here, while it seems plausible that a radioisotope electric generator could provide enough energy to power Curiosity rover, the Opportunity rover seems unfit for purpose by comparison. So let's just talk about the testing of these vehicles, because I've worked in my career as an engineer for the best part of 20 years and been involved in a lot of testing of products. And what I set out in the document is the philosophy that you use when you test products, in that you have a separate test department and design department, and they're not really supposed to collaborate with each other, because you look at the requirements of the product. The test department will have its own engineers who devise the test procedures and carry out the tests separate from the designers, because there's always a chance that both sets will interpret the requirements incorrectly, and therefore it will pass a test without complying with the requirements. So there's all these things, and the videos that I've seen put out by NASA, there just seem to be one big happy family there. It doesn't seem that they're doing independent type of testing that I could see in their videos.
Well, they appear to show some scientists working hard to develop the rovers, but there's absolutely no documentation, no film footage of any of the development stage, or very little documentation and footage of the development of the rovers. And particularly, of course, the landing stages. I think it's the Curiosity rover had a very complicated 6-stage landing procedure.
That was, we were discussing this earlier, and it does. I mean, from the videos they put out, it does look more like a PR exercise, and sort of, patting themselves on the back, rather than some type of rigorous, type of audit test where somebody is actually pinning these people down and checking that the systems meet the user requirements, and that these systems are working as designed.
I would expect a device like a rover to probably have several test specifications, each with hundreds, if not thousands, of tests to test against mandatory requirements. All signed off, but all we've got is a few videos from NASA. We can look at this one that they've put out, which was the drop test.
Oh yeah.
So we'll just have a look at this now.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
So big fanfare, but what actually happened in that test? We saw something kind of lowered to the ground. Now, I've worked on systems which lower nuclear weapons into Trident submarines, right? And when we're testing that type of equipment, they're operating within, let's say, certain acceleration parameters and velocities. So you don't know that the thing's passed the test until you've got your test data back. Because what we used to do when I was at Faslane nuclear base, we put a 125-ton bag of water on the end of a crane and we'd drop it and then see if the braking system worked, and the accelerations would be measured, and then you wouldn't know until afterwards it's passed the test. You certainly wouldn't stand there clapping your hands. So it just, I don't buy it, you know.
It's right. I mean, if you watch that video, which I think is the test of this so-called sky crane drop mechanism which was allegedly used in the landing of the Curiosity rover. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's like they've set up this rig, they've dropped something down, and they're looking up, it hasn't broken. Therefore it's passed the test. So that's what it looks like to us. I mean, again, but there may be things that we can't actually see, but why can't we see more of those? Somebody, going through a list of checkpoints, on a list, or like you say, measuring the acceleration of this component and the stress on that component, what have you. We don't really see that, certainly not in the video. So again, and I think one of the things we're talking about, Richard, isn't it, is having some type of independent verification of NASA's claims.
Now let's come on to the outside area where they've allegedly used to test some of these rovers, known as the Mars Yard. So we'll just put some photographs up on the screen, and it's not the most impressive test site in the world, is it? I mean, what are your thoughts on it, Andrew?
Well, like you say, I mean, it's one of those things, a bit like the Apollo pictures. When you look at them, they seem plausible. When you look at this, it seems like a plausible test area. But when you were pointing out, for example, that your own experience of going on test sites for some of the projects you've been involved in the past, and I've been on one or two of those sorts of projects as well. Probably not to the extent that you have, but yeah, it's true. You would have some more. You'd have more security. You'd have more equipment sort of set up. It doesn't really look that
as you said earlier, you're talking each of these rovers, whether they're the test rover or the actual rover, you're talking multi-millions of pounds each. So there's not even, doesn't even look like there's any security there, so someone could just come in and steal it. So it just doesn't look like a comprehensive environmental testing site to me. Right, well, we've yet to come on to the most damning evidence, by the way. I mean, this is really just background what we're discussing at the moment. A rocket was launched at Cape Canaveral on the 26th of November 2011, and it got to Mars in August 2012. And this was filmed, or the Curiosity team sitting behind their consoles, which I find a little bit intriguing, because you've got all of these operators sitting behind consoles, supposedly looking at different parts of the mission of this craft as it's going towards the surface of Mars. But we know that a signal from Earth to Mars takes at least 3 minutes, so that's 6 minutes to get there and to get back. So if they were to modify any sort of part of the mission, it's a 6-minute feedback loop. So they're not looking at a live image. So I would have thought the vast majority of the program to land the thing, or if not all of it, would have to be completely pre-programmed and automatic. So I asked the question, well, what are all these operators doing?
If there's some buffeting in the atmosphere that this thing is going through, and they need to respond to it, then it's going to be 6 minutes later when this thing's already gone thousands of miles off course and potentially crashed. So they must have done some very good modelling and had a lot of good data as to how that thing was going to come down. I mean, I think when they have the press conference, which we're recommending that people watch that landing press conference. We're going to talk a bit more about that in a minute, but they say, I think within that, they say they landed within about 50 metres or something, or 500 metres of the target area, which is, if you're going all the way to Mars, that's pretty incredible. Right. Are they just good engineers and skillful people, with the mechanics and so on? But
there is a video which allegedly shows the craft kind of going down to the Martian surface, and then there's another photograph which they claim to be a Curiosity rover on the end of a parachute. So how would, because people who would say that these missions did land on Mars, they would cite these two pieces of evidence, both the video and the photograph of with the parachute out taken by a Mars orbiter.
In some ways, the difference between the Apollo deception and the rover's deception is CGI, which is why the pictures we're seeing now are so much more convincing. JPL themselves, the Jet Propulsion Lab, have actually developed software called Virtual Presence in Space technology, which is cutting edge CGI, beyond anything we've seen in the movies. Isn't anybody wondering why